Hi everyone. We're just going to wait one more minute to allow some people to kind of just get into the room, and then we'll kick it off. So just give us 60 seconds here, and then everybody will introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the content where we're going to discuss current and future state of PMPs and curated deals. Should have background music going as we let people roll in here. Okay, as people continue to roll in, based on my screen, Ted, you're in the top left, so I'm going to give you the mic to introduce, yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're at and what you're working on, and then you can pass the baton to Chris, and he can do the same, and then I'll do mine, and then we can start talking about the content. So over to you.
Love it. Thanks, Neil. I'm Ted Smith. I'm the head of enterprise sales at Audigent. And Audigent is a data activation and curation and identity platform. We have a next-gen DMP that sits under the hood of our operation. And we came to market working with largely premium publishers in the space to originate data from every digital touch point that they have and monetize that data throughout the programmatic ecosystem. And we'll talk about this more, but what we found out very quickly is that there's really novel ways in which you can be activating data, especially as you move towards a cookieless future. So we've been very focused on using an identity framework we have called Hadron, and actually using that to activate data via the supply path. With that, perfect lead into Chris and the Xandr Curate team.
Sure, thank you. So folks, my name is Chris Caddy. I manage Curate US operations over here. So working closely with Reklaim and with Audigent, as well as other growing curators. A lot of folks might know Xandr from our DSP or our SSP businesses, but we've actually been growing a lot through our Curate business this year, which is really our solution to kind of how do you operate and activate media intelligently for the cookieless future. So glad to be here and excited to talk about kind of where curated technology is taking us.
Yeah, great. And so I'll finish off, and anybody that's new to this webinar series, we do this once a month. We try to keep it pretty short, so don't worry, you're not going to be in here for 2 hours on another video call. This will be max 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to try to give you as much information about this new world of PMPs and curated audiences. If you're not familiar with me and or Reklaim, I'm Neil Sweeney. I'm the founder of Reklaim. Reklaim is a company that's really been created to allow consumers to take back or reclaim control of their data and then option off it. Should they choose to sell that data to a brand, a platform, that's up to them. Naturally, they're compensated accordingly. So we feel like we're solving issues around privacy and compliance. And it's great to work with companies like Xandr and Audigent, who are very much aligned in the same kind of philosophy. So this, two other kind of housekeeping items. One, it's fluid, everyone. So if you have a question or you want to dig a little bit deeper on something that Chris or Ted has said, feel free to write in the chat. The panelists will pick it up in natural order, and then we'll try to answer all your questions. If we don't get to your question is definitely relevant. We will spend 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to actually to knock those off. Lastly, both Audigent, Xandr, and ourselves, they all have copies of this webinar. So if you have to bounce early, you'll be able to find this not only on the Reklaim website, but probably on the partners' websites as well. So with that, let's frame this up, guys, because everyone's talking about PMPs and everyone's talking about CTV, and there's all these topics. And I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So let's just, for the audience sake, kind of define what a curated audience is. And I think as a consequence of that, once we get through that definition, I think it'd be really helpful for everybody to get an understanding as to how things have evolved, because I think that there's some common misconceptions around PMPs. So let's knock those off so everyone's more educated. But Chris, I'll start with you. What is a PMP as it relates to you in 2021? And what does this deal or this curated audience look like from a Xandr POV?
Sure. So Xandr rolled out a technology called Curate about 18 months ago, and you all are close customers of us today. And Curate basically gives you the capability of matching both audience plus supply in one delivery vehicle, which is a multi-publisher PMP. So, effectively, we can think of this as how can you intelligently package audience, curate supply, and kind of do it in a way that's really operationally convenient for the trader by giving it into a single deal ID and transact the way they've kind of always transacted, though it's usually with publishers. And this looks actually very different from how folks thought of PMPs 3 or 5 years ago, which are traditionally just with one single publisher and sometimes would struggle to scale. We're trying to solve both audience targeting problems of the future, but also just scaling problems of the future by giving folks the keys to a technology that allows you to match both audience and well as supply, and to package it intelligently and deploy it to any DSP.
Ted, what's your thoughts as to the definition here?
O profile, o dígito só tem a MAID que eu preciso.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when we look at PMPs, the traditional PMP, that's a very 1.0 version of programmatic. Like it's really constrained. As Chris noted, it's individual publisher largely to individual buyer, and it doesn't really take advantage of all the offerings of what programmatic really promises. And so we as a data provider, we really saw there being a great opportunity to be able to join our audiences and first-party data that we bring from a publisher basis and a multi-publisher basis, and bring it via the supply path to curating inventory around that. And I think when you look at reasons towards the cookieless future, that was one reason why it made sense. But also, we also have our own trading teams and are familiar from our buyers that there's a lot of efficiencies that can be found in looking at a multi-publisher PMP and all the benefits that it provides.
So what's changed? Because I think, PMPs have been around now for a little while. And I think that there's some misconceptions around a PMP being available in only one platform. It's one buyer, one publisher. Can we talk about what this sort of version 2 of kind of the PMP looks like and dispel some of those myths, Ted?
Sure. I think that, one of the things about a new approach to a PMP is addressing a lot of concerns about in the programmatic space about the longer tail potentially of inventory. So it provides a real opportunity to be able to look at sort of known inventory sources that you can define by audience sets that you apply to them. So immediately you're kind of creating a space between a traditional PMP and then that much longer tail that looks at really strong inventory sources. It also provides great efficiencies from a buying perspective. So you don't have the traditional dynamics, bid dynamics that are provided when you look at something that's transacted via deal ID. So you get great scale, whether you're applying contextual targeting for this PMP or audience-based targeting when you look at it. And so all of that, much more scale than you could see within a given PMP that you wouldn't be able to run audiences on top of typically.
Yeah, and building off of what Ted said, I think what's also changed is just the ability to dynamically affect a PMP. So traditionally, when we think of optimization and where it's applied, it's usually in the DSP. But what we're able to do is actually on the supply side, using technologies like Curate, is to actually dynamically improve the supply that you're targeting. And so having that work in conjunction with the DSP optimization that's already happening allows for a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario where you're adding value on both ends.
So on that optimization, what's the role of the buyer or the planner kind of involved in that, and or the publisher, or is that all being taken care of on behalf of kind of the partner like a Curate?
You bring up a really interesting question, and I think the best way that I can think of to answer it is first just recognizing like what happens when cookies go away. And what happens is, first, third-party data struggles to scale, and between 50 and 60% of all DSP spend is targeting some form of third-party audience. And when that doesn't give you a single package to find both performance and scale, then we need to turn to other solutions that do. And if you think about how we expect transactions to happen in the future, there's going to be lots more fragmentation because you can't just have one solution for audience targeting. You kind of have to bake in contextual solutions because 80% of addressable audiences go away. You need to include any first party audience that you have, which is really valuable. And you also want to include any sort of publisher known audiences. And the only way that you can combine all of those things in an operationally convenient way is to kind of have a provider kind of sitting in the center and delivering all of those things through a single deal. So I think we're going to see, some trading capabilities being enhanced. So just productizing some of the things that maybe traders are currently doing manually. But there's also going to be a lot of intelligence required by the trader to really think of, which of these curated solutions are working best for me, which one has kind of the DNA that we would expect to perform the best. So I think today traders are deciding between, standard audiences, they're deciding between supply. And I think in the future, they're going to be thinking through, how do I choose between different vendors who add value in different ways?
So I want to stay on that quick point because there's a couple of things. Why is the PMP not as exposed to sort of that deprecation of the identifier compared to, say, that standard audience segment? And I think the other kind of thing that I want to talk to is I'm a buyer today. I've been buying audience segments out of DMPs or DSPs for years. It's a known practice. I know how to do it. What's the rationale as to why I should be actually sort of embracing this PMP? And let's talk a little bit about how, the stagnant potential nature of an audience segment gets replaced by a dynamic nature of a curated audience.
Yeah, sure. So when you think about, third-party data provided scale and performance through a single object. But in the future, those current ways you're buying is only going to provide 20 or 30% scale. So a buyer or a trader has to think of, hey, how can I make up the scale difference, but do it in an intelligent fashion? And the answer is some sort of contextual solution as providing some value, some sort of first-party data solution providing other value, and then direct to publisher IDs or insight that they have as kind of being a third source. But a trader doesn't have enough time to manage the complexity of these three new different ways to target intelligently on the internet. So if we've just tripled the complexity of how to buy media, we're not going to triple the headcount of how many traders there are. It's just not operationally realistic. And so for that reason, we need folks who are really ahead of the curve, like both of you, to really be building the kind of almost the reinvention of third-party data being applied on the sell side.
Just one quick point, because I know, Ted, you want to comment on this, but
Yep.
Is it fair to assume, Chris, that by embracing kind of this new version of the curated deal, that you're able to take multiple tactics and kind of drive them into one efficient process? Because I know that one of the gaps that we find, and I'm sure everybody else finds, is we're all in the talent crunch. It's very hard to find people. We know that at the agency level that there's a ton of churn. And so I think that point about, as the technology continues to influx from a complexity point of view, how that doesn't align with kind of the scarcity of talent. So the industry needs solutions to provide more operational efficiency. And I get the sense from what you're saying here is that a curated deal, because it's dynamic and live and aggregates those various tactics, that this is one solution for a brand, a holdco, to kind of stay up to operationalize some of those gaps.
Yeah, I think, the way that we found in working with the holding companies or even independent agencies or clients in housing the programmatic is that you can create an entire curated marketplace of deals that could be either verticalized, they can be very client specific, product specific. There's a lot of ways in which you can configure basically a central library that can sit within a DSP that then they can be actioning on. And to us, that allows the traders can get back to thinking more strategically. They can be less involved in some of the more laborious tasks of actually running a campaign, and know that things like both audience and inventory can be optimized via the supply path, and they can keep kind of their eyes off that. To me, it's kind of like the Tesla opportunity, basically, in that you can have a semi-autonomous vehicle basically that's driving, but you still have all the controls in where you want to be headed.
Yeah, that's important because I'm assuming because you're dealing with the brands and the agencies so often, Ted, is there initially some concern on their behalf regarding control and kind of loss of power? And how is that educated to those various brands and agencies as to like, look, this is a solution, not a threat? How do you deal with that internally with the various different clients of yours?
This is entirely built out to be a full self-service opportunity when you look at the buyers. And so we see it as an opportunity to co-pilot or to support them to really spoon feed the most promising and more productive inventory into their DSP. So let the bidder on the buy side do all the work that it should be doing, but at the same time be providing it a full deal library basically they can be decisioning on instead of scrapping to be able to find loss of cookies and other identifiers that is trying to use sort of a scattershot approach towards finding audiences. So there's been a lot of education, I think, and necessary education in the marketplace around what curation is and is going to be. But I think that we've already seen great benefits through a number of buying teams that are recognizing how it's a better process as well.
So I want to come back to the one thing, and maybe it's a bit provocative, is this notion of, it seems intuitive, if this is this live kind of constantly updating curated deal, does this put the open exchange at risk? And maybe Chris, you've got a hand in kind of both camps. So how is the emergence of this new deal impacting kind of open exchange in your opinion? And then I think on a go forward, is it even realistic to assume that potentially that PMP world is going to be the dominant form of transaction and that it will replace the open exchange? And just thinking through that regarding the DSPs, the SSPs, like so the DMPs and all the other acronyms, like the downstream impact on the industry, should that actually take place? I mean, that could be its own webinar, but like what's your thoughts on kind of how the emergence of this impacts open exchange and then its impact on kind of other people in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think about this. I mean, so PMPs are already, technically the dominant form of exchange. So I think we surpassed that inflection point at some point in the last few years. So, and this makes sense because naturally the growth of PMPs has happened because folks want a more curated approach to buying the supply that they buy. But what I think this means from an industry perspective is we have more accountability on publishers to make sure that they're building inventory and content that keeps someone's attention. And then we have more tools at the buyer's disposal. So I think that's going to continue to mean less spend on the open exchange, but that's actually at the benefit both for buyers and for publishers, because for publishers, if you're offering better inventory, yours is going to be in a curated deal. And if you aren't, then you'll be left out.
So would you suspect that every DSP kind of in the future is going to have curated PMPs like as part of their overall offering? And if they don't, they're inevitably susceptible to getting punted? Simplistic.
I think we've found that DSPs are looking at building curated marketplaces and are actively building them where they would traditionally be building data marketplaces. And right now they're doing it to be supportive and kind of a bridge to that structure. But I think that that's the future state of what buying is going to look like.
Quick one, just before Chris, you jump in, because I know you want to. What's the interoperability of that PMP? Because again, if you think about the sort of the fragmentation of all those DSPs, if we're going backwards and building these silo-based individual PMPs, is there any interoperability around that? Or are we, if you're the publisher or the data supplier, are you now beholden to having to cut deals with all these independent players again? Or is there a way for you can go one to many?
I mean, the commercials at this point allow for that ultimate flexibility and potential like agnosticism to DSPs. So, deals can be replicated across multiple DSP partners and live and be bought somewhat generically in that case. So it actually solves a lot of issues in the marketplace around both interoperability and and integration. I think that we've found where there's challenges with DSPs needing or want to integrate in other places. We know that SSPs already have that tight bound relationship with them, and it's a great opportunity to deliver more value into that where they're currently integrated.
Yeah, and then building on the point that you made, Neil, around are DSPs going to have to adopt some sort of deal marketplace? I think the answer is absolutely. If 50 or 60% of transactions that are happening today are targeting third-party data, and those signals are only going to provide 20 or 30% of the scale they are today, then they need some way to deliver performance at scale. And I think the only way they can do that is through a multi-publisher PMP, which you all are embarking on already. So I think we're going to see a future where every DSP has existing data marketplaces they currently have. But again, if the scale is dramatically curtailed, they're going to have to provide some sort of curated PMP marketplace to allow their buyers to scale intelligently.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, you asked previously that there is, what is this going to do to Open Exchange? And I think it's almost the opposite. It's that Open Exchange is going to get decimated regardless. And this just provides continuity for buyers that are looking for that same type of addressability as Open Exchange, just in a new form.
Yeah, I mean, I can go in a couple different directions. So let's stay on that part. So the bomb that's going to go off in the Open Exchange due to addressability, why isn't the PMP exposed to that exact same threat? So unpacking it to say, all right, the majority of inventory is exposed to the cookie's going to zero. Okay, let's default down to a universal ID solution, which is a combination of a mobile ID and an email address. But we all know that the mobile ID is on its way to going to zero, and that the email address in itself has issues around kind of privacy and fidelity, so on and so forth. So talk to me about how I agree. I mean, I think that the Open Exchange is under pressure, but how does the PMP kind of solve some of these addressability issues that the Open Exchange can't?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And part of it is just from Curate Tech. So we're able to, if you just want to send an audience plus the entire Open Exchange, you can actually do that. But we think the folks that are going to be winning in the future are those that have some sort of curation on both ends, of curation of audience and curation of supply. Today, most of the industry can't do both things. Generally, they'll be taking their first-party data assets and trying to just apply that on Open Exchange and deliver that via PMP. But I think in the future, we're going to have kind of a lot more intelligence being applied on both sides of that and delivered through a single PMP. Okay.
So one thing I wanted to explore a little bit was sort of the power relationship of publishers, sort of specifically kind of the larger publishers, because, I think this was an interesting thing that we had talked about in the past, is that I had asked the question about this notion of, can you have enough scale as an individual publisher? The answer is, well, in a curated deal, you're putting together multiple publishers. That in turn is giving you the scales. That's giving you the scale in that particular audience. If that's the case, does the publisher now have more of a say and more control? Meaning, because we all know that the publisher has been looking for more of a voice in the programmatic ecosystem, and they've been kind of getting not what they want. Is this sort of finally the opportunity where the bigger publisher has got a little bit more power and say as it relates to the programmatic kind of space? And then the last thing, and then you guys can pick it up and riff from whichever direction you want to take. Are we replacing kind of the Open Exchange with a series of individual walled gardens, otherwise known as curated PMPs? And then how does that relate to sort of the obvious walled gardens like the Googles and the Facebooks? So I'll push back and let you guys kind of pick off any part of that you want to discuss.
I guess I might sort of address the last one last, I think in some cases, because I think in some cases we really are creating dynamic walled gardens, which work to the benefit of both the publisher as well as the buyers ultimately. Like we've seen what we call smart PMPs, or these curated deals, driving publisher prices up, but at the same time driving efficiencies actually in the buy and conversions up as well. And so it's largely better for everybody. And if you look at what's happening out there in the retail media space, there's a boom there. And there's a thought that every e-commerce operator every brand can theoretically kind of be its own retail media network. So if you look at a retail media network basically being a publisher with just a much more e-commerce oriented focus, it is a series of walled gardens, but it provides ultimate control around it, which is really exciting for everybody.
Yeah, and to pick up on that point, I think publishers always struggled because they never had the scale to be a heavy hitter and have the influence that they wanted with their buyers. Now we're giving the technology so that publishers actually have a much bigger influence and can capture way more spend because they're able to take their audience and not only scale it on their existing properties, but say, hey, for every on-site publisher deal that I create, I'm also going to build a curated deal so you can reach that audience across the entire web. And that means, we're giving each publisher the ability to scale their audiences 100x to 200x in a 15-minute process. And that's, I think, pretty exciting. So the potential for publishers to capture way more spend programmatically is finally here. And the PMPs that they've traditionally struggled to scale can now scale meaningfully. But I think also to the point of, what does this mean for the broader ecosystem? I think you're right to point out that there's going to be a lot more kind of network-based activity or walled gardens, because suddenly the tech now exists where you could just put your audiences into a curate seat, suddenly your own media network, and you can use different levers that you're maybe not accustomed to using, things like pricing. So maybe now a publisher can finally monetize non-endemic audiences and give them a lower price point than they do their endemic advertisers. And that's just become much easier to be flexible on. So I think the new power goes to publishers, but even more power also goes to the networks who have maybe a little bit more bandwidth to be strategic in using these tools.
Okay, I got a couple.
Sorry, I just wanted to further that. I think that I heard a stat at one point that something like for every page engagement on a given publisher, that there's an opportunity to reach that individual user an additional 300 times within a given week. So if you look at a publisher that then has the opportunity to use these PMPs and multi-publisher PMPs as an extension, look at the opportunity in CTV or other channels that they might not have selling opportunity in, to be able to package that in with bigger deals. So that's a win for the publishers as well as buyers that really appreciate the nature of those audiences.
Okay, I've got a couple of topics, so we'll play a little Monty Hall here. You guys can choose between door number 1, 2, 3, or 4. So behind door 1, we've got fraud, ? And how it relates to kind of PMPs, better or worse, the same. Behind number 2, you've got universal IDs and their place in the curated world. Behind door number 3 is measurement, ? And behind door number 4 is connected television. So I'll pass to you, Chris. You can choose one of those 4, and then Ted will push it back to you, and we can pick up something else there.
Yeah, I would pick number 2.
UIDs for $200, Chris. Over to you. Okay.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting is in the trade press, I mean, we heard so much about the competition between all these different IDs. And the fact of the matter is they provide 20 or 30% reach in the new world. And so I think the conversation has in some places just been misplaced. The exciting opportunity to me is what do we do with the non-addressable audiences? Because A, they're going to get cheaper, and B, there's opportunity to add a lot of value, because even if you don't have the traditional identifiers, the device ID, the cookie ID, you do have things like IP address, which still will persist probably for another couple of years. We hope you still have location-based information. You still have the property that they're coming from, and so the ability to add intelligence to these other things at a time when non-identifiable audience is getting much more affordable is, to me, like the holy grail, especially if I'm a CPG advertiser or if I'm an advertiser where I maybe require less precise targeting and I'm just looking for scale, like this is a huge opportunity. And the ID conversation that I've seen has been really focused on kind of the 20 or 30% of inventory. But like the real opportunity to add value is like, how are we going to be smart about targeting the other 70 or 80%? Because that inventory is going to become a lot more affordable and there's opportunity to add a lot more value there.
But aren't the two sort of interrelated? Like your ability to target the other component of data has a dependency on the identifier. So if the identifier is under pressure, then how can you target that other component?
Yeah, so by that I mean just like the cookie ID or the ramp ID versus UID 2.0 versus other IDs. So that's the ID that I'm talking about. What you're able to add through the Curate ID or through Curate is other publisher-based identifiers. Maybe they have on-site information. Contextual as just a share of spend is going to grow really meaningfully. And so I think those are the areas that there isn't enough conversation about how can we add value with these kind of newer terrains, because I think that's going to be, if that's 70% of the inventory, like that's the exciting part. And we're seeing, not as much innovation happen there.
Yeah, and this will be a bit of a softball to you after, Ted, because it's going to go right towards Halo, I suspect. But I think from what we've seen on our side, as a company that is providing data, the position is always, which identifiers are you going to support, right? So the conversation in 21 was about cookie. There was a lot of activity. Everybody stopped. Now the activity is going to pick up again in 22. It's always like, well, what identifiers are you going to support? Most of, at least from everybody that we talk to, is taking kind of an agnostic approach. We're going to support a variety because we don't want to have to pick and choose. So I guess the question is like, how does this work? How do you guys at Audigent sort of think about the various different publishers, brands who are making a decision to kind of potentially purchase on a specific identifier? And then I guess if I'm the data company providing data into a Xandr or an Audigent, what's the direction that you should be giving to us as to how we should be looking at a universal ID, knowing that there's a half a dozen, that there's not going to be 15, there's probably not even going to be 6, there's going to maybe be 3. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that you guys will get this in real time. Our rebranding of Halo ID is now referred to as a Hadron ID. For any physicists out there, you'll understand that a Hadron ID is about multiple different subatomic particles that are attached via an electric charge. And to kind of bring definition to that, the idea is that we believe in that same idea of interoperability. We believe in kind of having a container that allows for that interoperability, and that's what Hadron ID is designed for. It was really built out of the publisher need initially. So if we can create a persistent ID that is derived from first-party identity from a publisher, and then create a more contiguous look of usership across multiple sites from our publisher network, the key is then proliferation of that same ID through SSP partners and through things like a pre-bid module. So our course is really trying to, provide all that power, supercharging everything, via the publisher path, I think, and see that all data can operate as closely to that as possible through that loop.
Got it. Any comment on that, Chris, or can we move on?
I think we can move on. I think the point that I would make just on the identifiers that are most commonly cited in the trade press is, they're all email based, but I think we're going to have a lot more proxies for identity that have really not been discussed, but I think is part of, Audigent's approach and part of others as well. So I think understanding how we can use other signals to help estimate who someone is or who they might be is, I think, a really important way to solve how do we drive performance at scale. We're excited to explore and learn more about folks who are kind of leaning into this kind of multi-pronged approach to identity and not just kind of the email as the end all be all.
That's a good point. I think, yeah, the flexibility is the key, sort of finding identity where there is available identity, but also taking more of a vectored approach, I think, towards it, I think is, the way that we're working to think about it with partners.
I never really understood a lot of the kind of logic on some of the universal IDs, which is, you're losing the cookie and the mobile ID due to privacy, which can ultimately be reset, and you're replacing it with a deterministic identifier that can't, like, that's clearly on a collision course with privacy regulation. So, to just riff into sort of some of the questions that are being posed, like, yes, there's a lot of chat around kind of Web3 and crypto and decentralized data. The question with that, at least in our opinion, is that a lot of the stuff that we believe is that at Reklaim is that if you're putting data underneath the kind of the control of the consumer, you're taking a step towards that world where you can actually be exchanging data on a protocol like the blockchain, right? So the issue that a lot of the blockchain companies have today, and just for context, when we first started our business, we wrote the first version on the blockchain, encrypted data on device, wrote a contract on the blockchain. The issue is really about scale. So the question is that all the audience today that we're all targeting, that's got to move to a new world in order for it to actually take effect. What I think the challenge, which often gets misled in the market, is that, is the future going to be consumers are more involved in the data? Naturally, we're biased. We believe the answer is yes. But the gap in the market is, how do you get from present state to future state? There's a massive chasm between these two. If the present state is where we are today, pressure on identifiers, and the future state is potentially in a decentralized environment controlled by consumers, how do you move systems, operation, tactics, consumers, all that money and everything that's happening, and just move it overnight? And I think what we find a lot of the time is that a lot of the companies that are emerging in the blockchain space saying, we're gonna build it on the chain. The question is, okay, great, but you have to convince 300 million Americans to get on the chain and to embrace your protocol. And then you got to tell Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and so on and so forth to do it. That's where kind of the inertia gets. So I think the future, in our opinion, and feel free to comment on this, guys, is that we believe that the gap in the marketplace has always been that there is no access for a consumer to access the data or to have any optionality around it. That is eerily similar to the philosophy of what's happening in the blockchain, but you don't necessarily have to move it right now to the blockchain in order to satisfy that gap, in that you can kind of iterate towards that in the future. I don't know if you guys have those conversations internally, if you want to comment, but I thought just talking about identifiers and the deprecation of identifiers segued into kind of one of the questions that was being asked in the Q&A.
I'll say that I agree with that, and that I think that a lot of that around identity also has to do with when you think about data origination and provenance, and kind of where data is sourced from when it comes to that. Like, why do you really have the access to be able to bring data, out into the marketplace, for someone on someone's behalf? And so a consumer has to understand the mutual value exchange, I think, in that. So, we see the publishers, that are trusted publishers are likely to have that, and maybe somebody, is going to provide hashed email because they have a particular relationship with the publisher. When you look at your data sourcing, it obviously comes from a place of trust as well. So I think, that's going to be closely involved with how identity starts to play out. Like, for what reason is the consumer going to lean in and actually provide that identity? Like, where's that meaningful?
Yeah, our research, I think one of the misconceptions in the market has always been that consumers aren't willing to share data. That's false on so many levels. It's just not true. And it's a bit of clickbait to kind of print that. The reality is that consumers are willing to give up data if they feel that there's value in return. Like, if there's value in return, i.e. I'm going to a website, which we all do, and I'm getting free content, I'll be giving up. The problem is when you kind of get into this world of what I've referred to as, like, this passive collection of data, or you're turning a consumer into a human CDO and arbitraging them all over the place. That's the part of the equation that the consumer does not like. And so as you move to this sort of curated world where there's, where the data is coming from a publisher, you're starting to kind of get rid of a lot of, I think you're going to start to increasingly get rid of some of those bad actors that are in the market.
Yeah, and I think the research continues to show that people prefer more personalized ads when it comes down to it too. They want a more personalized experience when you consider their overall web experience as well. So, whereas, they might not want that one-to-one type experience and some of that sort of creep factor that people refer to, but the reality is people want to feel known, I think, out there.
Yeah, and I would always say that I don't even think it's so much about ads, is that consumers are consumers. they buy product, right? They want to buy product that's relevant to them, right? So the closer you can get to data that's relevant, data or product that's relevant to them, the higher conversion. So I mean, that's a performance-based metric that we're already embracing. So I don't even look at it as an ad. And like, you're not selling ads, you're selling products. And if you can align the data and the consumer quite well with the product, you should do well. One thing I wanted to kind of talk to, because this also came up in our conversation, was this notion that the industry sort of needs to get used to this notion of the market having less addressable inventory, which sort of begs the question, are we moving to a world of proxies? And if we're moving to a world of proxies, how accurate are we as it relates to these proxies? And I naturally go here towards things like measurement, but what's your thoughts on the notion of, are we moving to a world of proxies and how that works with a less addressable audience?
Yeah, I can kick us off here. So I guess I would say we were always operating in a world of proxies. So if I see that someone saw an ad and then 2 weeks later they bought a consumer electronics product, did they buy that because of the ad, or did they buy that because they were a person likely to buy that product? We never really had full addressability. We just had a story around addressability. So what I think we're moving towards is kind of a less of a one-to-one relationship of like what reporting we're saying that ads drove, and more so, forced attention to the business metrics, to what, if I run an ad for this week and then I see that it lifted sales week over week by 5 or 10%, like that's the metric we always should have been looking at. And to some degree, I think in the digital space, we've been overly reliant on this concept of addressability, when really we were never able to provide causation to begin with. So I think it's actually creating a lot of useful consideration of how do we demonstrate impact. And sometimes we were able to show that with conversions, but like sales lift was and ROAS should always be how we're thinking about it. And that doesn't always have to be one-to-one.
I think you're muted.
God, rookie maneuver there.
You're 2 years into COVID and you're still doing that. You're on mute.
I know. Honestly.
You're never going to learn.
Yeah, I think that, when we consider addressability, one thing, if we're going to be losing a bit of addressability, the remarkable thing is that we're going to see that much more addressable media when it's actually coming to market, like CTV being the elephant in the room there. Like when I think about CTV and talk with many of our clients and partners, so much of CTV right now is just, purely trying to get eyeballs that are moving from linear into the CTV space. But the uncharted waters for a lot of people is actually true addressability within CTV. And I think that, if that's household level plus some delineation of individuals with it, that's still such progress on where TV currently exists and where the entire market can go, when you consider cross-channel addressability, because there's still great opportunity. Like we work predominantly in the CTV space, providing companion deals where you'll provide a CTV-based deal, and then you can look at online video and mobile associated with that same user base. And so I think that when you consider measurement, a lot of it can tie back to trying to unify around be it IP or other means of measurement.
So this is one thing that I think you would all agree on, is that as it relates to this sort of dynamic deal or this curated deal, would you agree that you've seen kind of this over index as it relates to CTV? And what's the reason for that? Is that because CTV isn't exposed to the cookie as much? Is it, as you said, Tad, that your traditional linear television has never been kind of very addressable, and here's an opportunity for you to get kind of direct one-to-one? Like what's been driving that growth, and kind of what do you think is going to happen with that increasingly more in 22?
Yeah, I can get it kicked off here. So I mean, some CTV is deal gated because you've got these large broadcasters and they don't want just any ad showing up on their inventory. And so, there's lots of large broadcasters and premium video content providers that would only allow their inventory to be transacted through a deal. And so, part of that has been just locked away and not accessible through the open exchange, but can be made available through things like Curate. So I think part of that is why we're seeing more activation on, say, deals via CTVs, just because it wasn't available. But then also because it's so expensive that folks want to have more control over this format, and kind of weren't able to stomach not knowing where their inventory showed up when they're spending $30 CPMs.
Yeah, and I think the pricing model where you see that data being baked in, with inventory cost on a dynamic pricing model, as well as a percentage of media, ends up working in buyers' best interest when you consider, different times of day and such. There's a lot of efficiencies in the buying of it, especially as it relates to CTV.
So this disconnect, I think, happens quite often amongst companies that are providing deals or data, and the CTV, they're trying to increasingly move more of their data and or inventory into a CTV environment. But if they don't have access to things like dynamic IPs, like how does the Audigent Xandr solution enable a traditional publisher or traditional data company to actually participate in CTV, knowing, of course, that increasingly, one, there's not enough supply in that space, and then sort of secondly, that's kind of the future.
Yeah, so I mean, the exciting thing about the Curate platform is that we have an entire team working directly one-to-one with publishers, so that a data provider or a publisher who wants access to many specific publishers, they don't have to do those. They don't have to broker those deals themselves. We're kind of doing it for them. And so, that's an exciting value add that we're happy to bring to market. So if you have a Curate seat, we'll give you hundreds of one-to-one publisher deals that you can include as part of your overall package. And then you can curate that you'd like based on anything from content category to broadcaster. So we're giving those tools directly to curators, so that anyone with a unique audience offering or anyone with a unique kind of way to curate supply can do so through the Curate platform without having to kind of do some of the manual work to get access to all of that supply.
Yeah, and from our side of things, we see it. I mean, we basically are provided with an average bid floor that we can recommend to buyers, and then what we would estimate as being the ideal bid pricing at scale ultimately, and it allows a lot of ease of use and to be able to action those multiple CTV publishers with an interconnected deal makes it really easy for buying too.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to round here quickly on time, so I'd encourage the audience, if you have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to pick them off over the next few minutes. But before we go, we're in December, we're going into 22, we've got to do a little bit of predictions. So let's talk through what do you predict is going to be happening in the space, and what's something that the audience, the buyer, the brand, the planner can kind of should be getting in front of heading into 22. So Chris, maybe I'll start with you give us one or two sort of predictions as to where you see the market going, and some guidance as to how people can be taking advantage of that. And then we'll pass it over to you, Ted.
Sure. So, I mean, one opportunity that Xandr is excited about, and I think Ted touched on it earlier, is that there are many companies with digital-based audiences that could never really realize that value within CTV. And through our platform, we're allowing anyone with a digital audience to take that, upload that, and apply it to any format. So that could be online video, that could be CTV. But we think that simply applying that digitally intelligent audience and reaching that person in a CTV environment is going to be just a massive opportunity for the industry more broadly. And because before, those data sets were really hard to activate in these environments. And just the scale of that impact across at least our footprint, which includes 100 million CTV devices across the US, is pretty massive. And so we're certainly excited about the growth of that development, and that's already happening as we speak. And then I think another opportunity is is just the folks who have always had a measurement solution. Now they can work with, say, Curate and not have to integrate across 5 or 10 different DSPs. They can, work through one platform, deliver their measurement solution and maybe audiences together, and not have to work through all those integrations. So, I mean, we're excited also that suddenly any measurement company can add a Curate seed and then deliver to any DSP. And I think getting past those integration hurdles means that there's just less friction in the industry more broadly.
I could have used that at Freckle, Chris. So you're a little late. So like that was like the bane of my existence, doing 1-by-1 integrations for measurement and location. Ted, what about you? What are you thinking kind of about 22 and what should people be aware of, and where do you think the market's going?
I guess the big thing that I know that we'll be hearing a lot about kicking off at CES included would be retail media networks and some version thereof. I think that curation is so core to that, but you can think of retail media as sort of being cut a lot of different ways potentially. And so I think that where we talked about attribution and measurement, working within like a closed feedback loop, you look at the opportunity to deliver data in a really secure way to buyers. To me, like that all sort of fits within what retail media network is looking to do, and something. And like when you look at curation, that's really what that enables. So I think we're really excited to pursue what that looks like with partners.
Great. So for everybody that's watching, both Audigent, Xandr, and Reklaim, they'll all have a presence at CES. So if anybody's going to CES, please reach out to those various different groups and get some time. Ted, just to wrap up here, if people wanted to reach out to get more information regarding Audigent, what you're doing and how it can work from them, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Appreciate that, Neil. Ted@audigent.com. So that's TED@AUDIGENT.com.
And Chris, same for you. Like, what if people want to learn more about the Curate platform? How can we help by introducing some of the participants to you and your product?
Sure. Yep. They're welcome to reach out to me directly. So my name is Chris.Cattie. So CHRIS.CATTIE@Xandr.com. Feel free to shoot me a note. I'm happy to set up an intro call and share more.
Yeah, and so I'm Neil Sweeney. You can reach me at Neil@Reklaim Yours. Reklaim's with a K. For all the platforms, including Audigent and Xandr. They're all on all the social platforms as well, LinkedIn, you name it. So you can reach out there too. So thanks everybody for joining today. As mentioned, there'll be a copy of this on, at minimum, the Reklaim site, but probably in the various different channels amongst the partners as well. If you want a copy and you can't find it, don't hesitate to reach out to any of the participants. We hope that this has been helpful. Stay tuned for the next installment of the webinar series. We don't know what the category is going to be, but we've covered everything from PMPs to privacy, to contextual targeting, to the blockchain. So there's always an interesting topic because there's always things to learn. So thanks everybody for your participation and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Thanks, Chris. Great to chat with you both.
Okay, take care, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See y'all.